My name is Amy Allen. I'm the Executive Director of the Darien Arts Center, and I'm happy to be partnering with the Child Guidance Center of Southern Connecticut for this parenting under pandemic situations. Tonight, I know some of the people that are on this webinar, and I welcome you and newcomers to both organizations. I'm very pleased to introduce Sandy Kornblum, the Communications and Events Manager for the Child Guidance Center of Southern Connecticut. And Sandy will take the program from here.
Thank you so much, Amy, and good evening, everybody. I'm so glad to be here tonight with all of you and with Dr. Jessica Welt, who will lead a powerful and informative discussion about parenting during this pandemic among this new normal we're living in. Throughout the talk, please enter any questions you might have in the chat box on the bottom of your screen, and we will leave time for questions and answers at the end of Dr. Welt's presentation. Now to introduce her, Dr. Welt is the CEO and Clinical Director of the Child Guidance Center of Southern Connecticut and joined Community Health Center Incorporated's leadership team when CGC became an affiliate in January 2020. She continues to provide administrative and clinical leadership to CGC programs that provide mental and behavioral health services to children, adolescents, and families in Lower Fairfield County. For over 15 years, Dr. Welt's career has focused on crisis intervention and the treatment of trauma, beginning as a FEMA crisis counselor in New Jersey, providing in-home therapy for children and families impacted by the events at the World Trade Center on 9/11. Dr. Welt graduated from Tufts University with a BA in Child Development and earned her doctoral degree from the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. She is a licensed psychologist in Connecticut and in New York. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Welt.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Amy and the Darien Arts Center for co-sponsoring this event with us. Before I get started, I wanted to also just say a little bit about the Child Guidance Center of Southern Connecticut. We are a freestanding mental health agency that has been serving children and adolescents and families in Lower Fairfield County for over 66 years, providing a wide range of mental health services from outpatient treatment and psychotropic medication management when necessary for kids, to some intensive in-home and community-based programs. We're the local provider for mobile crisis in response to 211 calls for the towns of Stamford, Greenwich, Darien, and New Canaan, and we serve approximately 2,000 or more families every year. So that's just a little bit about who we are. And at the end of our presentation, we will have contact information for anybody who'd like further information about services or programs that the Child Guidance Center has to offer. So without further ado, I bring you Pandemic Parenting and how to recognize the signs of depression and anxiety in our children as they readjust to school during COVID-19. So we are in a global pandemic, which is a new experience for every single one of the people in the world. And what we know about children and families is that it's normal to have reactions to very abnormal circumstances. And so it's now been over 6 months since the world sort of turned on its ear, and it's pretty common that children and adolescents and adults are all experiencing something. So it would be unusual not to see some changes in ourselves and our children in the last several months. We look at this from a population exposure model, and the simplest way to think about that is that it's like a bullseye. The closer you are to events that are traumatic, the more possibly impacted an individual can be. So everyone in the world is experiencing COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore it's normal that people have some reactions. But individual variables, for example, contracting the virus, contracting COVID yourself, knowing somebody who may have been severely impacted, very, very ill, hospitalized, or even death, or even died, would be an individual variable that's going to dictate how much a person reacts. And so the changes that we would expect to be normal changes our emotional changes may be more fearful, a little bit more stressed, a little more anxious. We might see cognitive changes, difficulty concentrating, maybe some distraction. Behavioral changes in kids can be things like more risk-taking behaviors, or for adolescents, maybe a little bit more withdrawn, isolating more, and physiological or physical changes. It's common when those stresses happen to have some what we call somatic symptoms. So headaches, maybe nausea, just discomfort in your body that is signs that something is going on for you. All of those normal things in most people resolve. So approximately 75% of the population who undergoes very stressful circumstances will afterwards return to their baseline sense of normalcy. And so more often than not, these are things that we take in stride, and we have resilience and supports in our lives that our kids and ourselves, we can kind of take them and get back to some semblance of normal. And so over the last 6 months, you may have seen in your family in the beginning, lots of fear, lots of anxiety. And as this became our new normal, we might see some of that sort of exacerbated symptoms tend to come back to normal. There may still be, because this isn't over, stresses and worries that are kind of characteristic of living in a time of uncertainty and lots of changing information and changing circumstances. But nonetheless, we tend to be able to function normally. For some kids, however, it can become more of a problem. And with adolescents, we look to depression and anxiety as the two kind of primary mental health challenges that can kind of evolve over an extended period of distress. And so with depression, we think about symptoms that are really characteristic is maybe a lot of sadness, could be frequent episodes of crying. We often see changes in eating, so we could either see an increase in eating or a loss of appetite. There could be some with increased withdrawal. Now, adolescents tend to pull away from their families, and the currency of friendship is so much what's going on for kids in between middle school and high school. And so it's developmentally typical for kids to want to care more. They might want to spend more time with friends than family. They might care more about what friends think than family. And that's a typical thing. But if you're starting to see your child really pull away, withdraw, not want to talk to anybody, really struggling to keep connections with people, or really not wanting to have interactions, that would be something concerning. Might see some real changes in sleep behavior. Sometimes it can affect sleep in that it can be difficult to fall asleep, maybe nightmares or restless sleeping. But also when depression can be characterized by the opposite, where there's extensive sleep and sleeping many more hours, feeling tired, difficulty getting out of bed. Another thing that is often happens in depressed adolescents is we could see, this is less typical in adults, but more so in kids, is sometimes irritability can be a sign of depression, and this really irritable, really not able to tolerate kind of any changes, and just feeling really cranky and irritable all the time. That's sometimes a way depression manifests in adolescence. Another thing to pay attention to that isn't listed here is oftentimes with depression, we lose interest in things that previously interested us. So if your child had been really interested in music, and then just can't like pick up the instrument and play, and just seems to show no interest, and used to be something they were passionate about, that would be another example of a sign to look for with depression. With anxiety, you'll notice some of these same things may happen, sleep or appetite disturbance. But with anxiety, we find that oftentimes our youth are really struggling with staying in the present. There are a lot of persistent worries or fears, and maybe worrying about the past or really focused on the future, and have a hard time kind of moving forward and being able to kind of get out of that place. We also might see sort of fears that seem irrational relative to the level of risk. So when it comes to the pandemic, you might, despite sort of the data that's showing the numbers are going down or had stayed low in Fairfield County, that you might have your teen saying, I can't go anywhere because it's too dangerous, and so that's a very different experience than an adolescent who might have asthma who's expressing that same fear, and maybe has more higher risk factors for that individual. So we want to kind of tease out individually whether those fears make sense in line with the level of risk that things present. And with anxiety, it is very common to have those kind of physical ailments that maybe complaints of frequent headaches or stomach aches or nausea, feeling sick, not wanting to go to school, but not necessarily having anything medically wrong. And so those are sort of signs that we want to look for in kids. And oftentimes our teens don't necessarily want to talk to us, they want to talk to their friends. And so we often will say, are you okay? And this picture shows a lot, as there's a lot going on internally, and what we get is, I'm fine. And so we want to think about, how can we as parents help kids who might be struggling? And so, as I said earlier, teens definitely don't always talk to their parents, or they start to pull away from their parents. And so we want to sort of make attempts to start conversations with our teens and be frank. I noticed a change. How are you doing? Or you seem worried. Can you tell me what's on your mind? Don't be surprised though if your child doesn't want to talk to you or says, I'm fine. So we kind of create this open door and let them know that we're here to talk when they're ready. And we keep kind of testing, but we want to kind of gently push on that string, because as any parent of a teen knows, if you push too hard, they shut down, or they kind of push us away. And so we want to kind of keep the dialogue open as much as possible and let our kids know that we're here for them if they need us. And to kind of not just say, oh, you're fine, okay, you must be fine, and move on. We also want to pay attention with depression, particularly, or very severe anxiety. Sometimes kids get to the point where they feel hopeless or helpless, and they don't see any end to their pain, and they may start to think about hurting themselves or killing themselves. If you are very concerned about your child, or he or she is having thoughts or articulating thoughts of death, or making any sort of statements or actions that have you concerned, it can be scary to ask difficult questions, but oftentimes kids are looking for help when they show us those signs, and we want to be able to ask very candidly and directly, because if we don't know the answer to the question, we can't get them the help that we need. So you've been feeling very down for weeks. Are you having any thoughts of hurting or killing yourself? I ask both because they're different. And so I encourage parents to feel comfortable asking both as well. Hurting could refer to self-injury or thinking about something else, and killing is about thinking about having thoughts of suicide. Again, we want to kind of keep asking this and try to find that balance about when to push and when to give space. And one of the things that I think parents struggle with sometimes, because our kids don't always make sense to us, is we want to acknowledge and validate our kids' feelings even when we don't agree with them. So they may be acting really irrationally, but saying to a child, I see how scared you are to go to school, but let's talk about how you're going to be able to be okay doing it. Those are sort of things that, instead of just saying you're being ridiculous, there's nothing to be afraid of, that the idea of validating our kids' feelings is a really powerful thing with adolescents, to feel heard and understood by parents, even if we still make them do what they don't want to do. The other thing that we can do is we can encourage healthy habits in our kids. Very often when stress happens or when pressures rise, we kind of give up the things that make us healthy. So when your teen has an enormous amount of homework, they don't eat as well, they maybe stay up really late, and they don't get a good night's sleep, and we kind of throw away all the good things that we do when we aren't stressed. And they are the things that really help us stay in a better place mental health wise. And so basics like maintaining exercise, nutrition, and sleep are things that, as much as we can help our adolescents to have some sort of structure and routine, consistent bedtime, a time when the cell phone or tablet is kind of offline, using do not disturb feature so that overnight they actually sleep and are not getting the constant alerts from their kids. Some families put into place this docking stations or places where all the devices get plugged in at a certain time of day, and it's kind of time to shut down and step away from social media, step away from the blue light that kind of affects our kids sleeping. And we kind of want to encourage that as much as possible and try to find that consistency in a time, particularly when things are chaotic and uncertain and changing all the time. That routine and structure can be really important. But it's also important to find healthy and fun outlets for the stress that we feel. And so the art is one of the wonderful things that we can encourage kids to get involved in, whether it's music or taking classes or getting involved in painting or pottery, etc. These types of activities for kids can be wonderful outlets to help with channeling the emotions that kids are feeling right now into healthy, productive ways and outlets and ways to express themselves and their emotions in a way that is healthy and restorative for them. But also other things are things like getting the kids involved in relaxation or meditation sort of routines that kind of take a break and take a step away. And the arts can also be something that can be relaxing as well, and just a way to sort of get out of the world that we are all living in with all the stresses of every day and back to school. And so this is something that we can encourage our kids to really be connecting with and trying to find as part of their everyday routine and structure. But sometimes that's not enough. And so we do, as parents, wonder, when is it time? When am I not enough? When do I need to get help for my child? And as a parent myself of a teenager, I ask myself this question every time my son has a bad day, is now the time? And so somebody once said to me, and I feel like this is great advice for any parent, is if your children are talking to you and you feel like you can handle what they're bringing to you, great. But if you feel overwhelmed or don't know what to say or do, or if you notice thoughts of harm to self or others, that things that really you shouldn't feel are your sole responsibility to handle, if your teen is talking about death, or if you feel like you just don't know if you have the answers that they're asking, if they are talking to you, but you just feel like you need some support, because so much of treatment for teens involves parents getting help as well to figure out how to help your child when they're struggling. And if your child asks to see someone or says yes when they're asked, that's a pretty good sign that an outside person could be helpful. There's a lot of benefits to therapy and having an outsider, someone outside the family. Particularly in the adolescence. With teens, like I've said several times, teens want to talk to their friends. They don't necessarily want to talk to their parents sometimes, or there's a lot of investment in our children in doing things that we hope they will do well, whether it's academic or peers. And so therapists are an unbiased adult in that child's life. And so they bring a perspective that no one else in the family can give them, because as a parent, you're invested in your child's decisions no matter what. And so there is sometimes easier for children who worry about disappointing or stressing their parents, that they don't necessarily feel like they can speak as freely to a caregiver as they can to somebody who isn't in that role. And then it is an extra set of eyes and ears on your child at a time particularly in the world where there is a lot going on and kids are having to navigate things that we can't always help them with. So much of what our teens are going through now in the pandemic, but also just with social media and balancing wanting to be liked with what's going to sort of mess up my future, and what digital footprint am I leaving, all of those things that were going on anyway. It's just hard to be a teenager and know what to do. And sometimes having another person mentor or support your child through some of those really difficult times can be really beneficial. And then we add to all of the stress of what was going on, and we say, okay, let's go back to school. And so we are in week 1 or 2 or 3, depending on where you are from, of our kids sort of navigating the new reality of the school year during COVID. One thing that is very much happening is that there is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of changes. And so when you're thinking about and navigating this return, we want to encourage you to talk to your kids and really help your teens recognize that every day could look different and things are changing so rapidly. So even if things are going one way, because of protocols and expectations with regards to what happens if there's a positive case in a school, how quarantines are going to work, and what happens, and all of those things are changing so rapidly. So having an open dialogue wherever possible to keep your children informed and you informed, and having kind of that discussion and knowing what's going on and being prepared for those changes and maintaining that flexibility can be a really valuable way to approach it. We also want to explore feelings. Oftentimes our kids don't necessarily openly tell us, I feel this or I feel that. So we want to ask them, how do they feel about it? How are they feeling about it? And what expectations do they have? How do they think it will look? And what does that mean for him or her? And as they are now back in school, is it living up to expectations? How is it different? What can we do to support or assist in making this easier? And every school seems to be approaching things just a little bit differently. So you hear one school where on remote days, the kids are basically independently learning, versus another remote school where on remote days, the kids are Zooming or Google Classroom in with their peers and their teacher with live streamed education. And so how much that works for each child is going to be variable, and what how each individual handles those changes and is going to be kind of unique, and therefore important to kind of keep inquiring about. We definitely want to help educate our teens about how they're going to access their teachers, managing the kind of risks and schedules, grading, and sort of where prior to COVID we might have with middle and high school started to encourage our teens to be more independent and more of their own advocates. There might be a little bit of a back step developmentally that their teens may need more of our support because it's confusing and changing. They still may be better at following all the changes in technology than we might be because they are of the generation that's growing up in this way. But nonetheless, as much as you can help them understand what their options are and how things work. And then the other piece is, this is stressful for parents. My work life went from being in office by myself during some point to having always a child doing homeschooling at the same time as I'm trying to juggle my life and my job. And so our kids really do pick up the cues from us. And so if we're stressed, if we feel anxious, if we're confused, our kids are going to pick that up. So we also need to pay attention to our own reactions as parents and sort of find healthy outlets for ourselves and maintain the healthy habits that we try to inspire our kids to live by as well. And the reality is that there are no real right answers. So for anybody who came looking for me to tell you exactly what to do, I am sorry to disappoint, because really it's an individual choice, and what's best for your teen and your family is what's best for you, and may not be the same as that of your child's best friend or your best friend or your neighbor or even your sibling or whatnot. And so we find that we make the best decisions we can at the time with the best information that we have, and then we always have the option, hopefully, to revisit those decisions if with new information as it comes available. And this is frankly what we are going to be facing for a while because of things changing so rapidly. And until such time as there is a vaccine that's safe and usable, and or COVID, there's herd immunity or whatever is going to happen to make the risk lower, we are going to be navigating these types of challenges for a while. And that brings me to this concept of how do we balance those risks? We want to find a balance between the risk of exposure to COVID or other infectious diseases and the isolation and the mental health risk that isolation from peers and isolation from the world can present. And so for each of us, we have to think about which risk is greater and what are the benefits and what are the challenges presented by both. And so with school, there is the potential for increased risk being on the school bus or with other people. You may have been much more isolated. They're now indoors with masks as opposed to over the summer where there was a lot of outdoor activity and people could social distance differently. And schools have done a very good job in trying to do that, but that's very different than supporting your child going to a party in someone's basement where there might be 20 or 30 or 40 kids. And so we want to sort of help our kids understand and make decisions, healthy decisions that enable socialization and enable them to sort of restore some sense of normalcy with regards to peer interaction, whether that's through school or socially, but also helping them understand the risks associated with their choices and to know how to be healthy and productive and safe in their decisions. And so how do we sort of give our kids some latitude and with education and knowledge about how to protect themselves, but at the same time kind of make sure they're safe and set limits that are age appropriate as well as conducive with the current situation. And so that is the best that I can suggest in terms of how we navigate the ever-changing environment of parenting during a pandemic. And as promised, CGC is here for you, and we do have a number of resources available on our website that are additionally helpful for families. And you can follow us. We post frequently resources that are available in the community, and we are looking forward to having a hopefully robust dialogue right now. If you have specific questions about what's going on for your family or your child, I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Jessica. I do have a couple questions that have come in. The first one is, my husband and I have decided to have our daughter attend in-person school when remote ends in a couple of weeks. She's extremely tentative about it, and we try to point out the positives to her, getting out of the house, staying safe by following the protocols. She'll see friends and her classmates and her teachers. We don't want to force her to go, but we really feel this is best. How can we ease her stress and comfort about going to school?
So it is, the nerves about going to school are very real for kids because they've been out of school for a long time, and I think there's natural sort of end of the summer avoidance that happens for kids. I don't want to go back to school. I hate school. And then there's also the part that is trying to help them to kind of keep an open mind. So it might be helpful to walk through what some of what they might expect on that first day. Negotiate a time period at which you'll reevaluate the decision to determine if maintaining this approach is the one that is the way that you want to go, and check in frequently. How was it? What and be open and to offer to help them figure out how to communicate their needs to the school staff and teachers. So if something isn't working or there's ongoing stuff, sometimes one of the things that we can often do is try to step in and do things for our teens, but I encourage parents to really help your kids by helping them be their own advocate, but so helping them if they need to write an email or they need to reach out to a teacher because something happened, how do they learn to do that on their own? They learn that by us helping them do that. And so that would be some of the things that I would try with this situation.
Thank you. Here's another question. My son has a group of friends whose parents seem to be much more relaxed about coronavirus than my husband and I are. It's starting to cause a significant risk between him and us. How can I address this, but still feel like he is following our level of vigilance about this virus and being safe?
Unfortunately, I'm not sure that any kids are always going to follow their parent, like see things the way their parents see things. And so it's difficult. There is a sort of developmental invincibility that happens with adolescents. Many adolescents, and this is developmentally appropriate and happens, many adolescents really see themselves as like, this is not going to happen to me. And so it's not uncommon for teens to really feel like, oh, I don't have to worry. And so it's about education, and it's about helping them to hearing them out and listening to them, and also helping them to sort of recognize the social responsibility aspect and drawing connections to your own life and your own family. What are your family's risks? Are there high-risk people, whether it's you as the parents or if there's grandparents, exposure? Also talking to them about sort of how to, sometimes some of it is peer pressure induced, or it feels like I don't want to be left out. And so how are exploring alternatives for socializing on his terms or your terms as an alternative. So if you're not comfortable with your son going to houses where they're not necessarily having the same restrictions, how do you feel comfortable letting your child host something that is meeting your restrictions? So outdoors, socially distant, wearing masks, whatever that might be. So sort of thinking through ways to support the socializing in a way that meets both of your needs might be a solution to consider. The other thing that I would just say is that our teens, there is when we think about development in adolescence, and we think about brain development and the development of the central nervous system, we often look at teenagers and think and say, what on earth were they thinking? And the reality is that the way that the brain develops is many times they weren't. And it wasn't because they were deliberately not, it's because they biologically cannot. And so the brain we have the amygdala that controls emotion, and we have the prefrontal cortex that controls the rational thinking. And in adolescence, the amygdala develops much more quickly and faster than the prefrontal cortex, which in boys isn't fully developed until the late 20s, early 30s, and in girls, mid 20s. So at this time in their lives, middle and high school, there isn't much happening in the part of the brain that controls rational thinking. And so when emotion is involved, particularly strong emotion, we say that kids flip their lids. They just don't even, the prefrontal cortex goes offline, there's no blood going there, it's all going to the emotions. And they think, they don't think, they just operate on emotion and impulse. And so they So sometimes they make decisions with strong emotions that are not necessarily ones that they might make when they are much older or that you would make. And we look back at ourselves as adolescents and we think like, what? I can't believe some of the things that I did. And I can't, so, and remember that we made some of the similar mistakes. Now, granted, I don't know that any of us went through anything like this at least not in this country. And so they're having to deal with much bigger risks and much bigger challenges than we might have faced at the same age. But at the same time, we have to give them as many tools as they can to support that when they are operating on right now. What's most important to teens at this point in their lives is that they are liked. More often than not, the currency of friendship is stronger than anything else. And so the altercation with caregivers is going to be tolerable, because as long as my friends like me and I'm not the odd man out or the odd woman out. And so that's something that we have to sort of help them navigate, but it's normal and typical, and COVID is a complicating variable, but it often is just something similar to parents who say, I won't let you go to another kid's house if the parents aren't home. That it's being consistent also with your limits and where the hard line is and where you're negotiable, and holding that fast, and kids will begin to see this is what's expected of me, and then help work with them to figure out something that is tolerable for both of you.
Thank you. That really spoke to me. And I've had some conversation with my own friends recently, because the rates, when the positivity rates are so low, that's sometimes a comeback from the children but now's the time, no one's sick or people are doing well, like, why can't I go out? So I think that's such great advice. Thank you. Okay, we have a couple more questions here. Here's one. While we have made the decision for our daughter to attend in-person school 3 days a week, we still are not letting her out and about very much other than school. How do we justify and balance this in a way that she can understand our thought process?
So I think that one of the things I might say to that parent is why this ongoing restriction, and how and where there be potentially some movement here. Because one thing that is happening in schools, which is really difficult, is many districts have split into different cohorts. So just because you're in school doesn't necessarily mean your child is in school with their friends or their social group. So it still feels like they are set apart. Speaking for myself, like I said, I have an adolescent son. He's in 7th grade, and his closest friends are in the other cohort. So his first day, he was like, who am I going to have lunch with? Because my best friends go on the days that I'm home. And so there is this piece that we have to sort of, as much as we're asking our kids to move and tolerate like these changes, we also have to ask ourselves, why is it okay to go to school and not okay to see friends outside of school? And so I would encourage those parents to really think about, again, finding a way that they can feel comfortable to allow some sort of limited socialization, whether that's one-on-one, 12 feet apart, 16 feet apart. I mean, people drive by. I mean, I've seen kids, some things that teens did early on in the pandemic, which I thought was really smart idea I'd heard about, was a bunch of high school kids went and they went to a big park and parking lot, and they all parked their cars in a big circle. They were nowhere near each other. Everyone sat on the hood of their car, and they were maybe like 20 feet apart from each other, but it was just a group of kids who missed each other and they wanted to see each other. No one came anywhere near each other. No one touched each other. But they were able to see each other. And so we aren't letting our kids hug or touch or like potentially their friends. And so we want to sort of find that negotiation. So in that situation, I would be encouraging parents to reevaluate and think about how to help the child have some sort of access to the friends that may not be in school. The other thing that I would add there, Sandy, is some families, this is not my term, but quarantines is something that has come up, is that families who find other families who are following as strictly or they are aligned with how they are handling their approach to the current restrictions. And when they do that, if you can find a family or two that you and those parents can see eye to eye and work together to sort of limit your social interactions, and that you all are in agreement, that sometimes that has been helpful by building that kind of group, whether that's with family or friends, to find some outlet for your kids to have socialization when in this time where they really are limited in what they can do. And given that sports and a lot of things are not happening the way they used to, a lot of our kids' opportunities have really shifted. And so we have to be creative and try to think of new ones.
Thank you. Here's someone who's asking something more for themselves. My daughter was begging us to let her go back to school, and we have agreed because I know internally it's the best thing for her, but I am so anxious and nervous about it. I can't seem to overcome my fears. What advice do you have for me?
I think that I can say I can relate. It's scary. This is not easy for any parent right now. We don't know what the right answers are. There isn't a playbook for this, and so that anxiety and nervousness is very understandable. I would be encouraging the parent to ask themselves the same thing and pay attention to the same list. Are your fears rational and make sense in light of the risks to your child? What's your district doing? Are there sort of reasons for your fear beyond that are kind of based on things that have happened? And I think one of the things that is a big draw in this time is I know I did this in the beginning and I stopped myself, was there is an overabundance of information out there, and some of it is very sensationalized. And so I encourage people to use resources that are reliable and up to date. So the CDC, the WHO, the World Health Organization for the most up to date recommendations about what is how to kind of best protect you and your family. And if you find that all of those things don't work, it is also can be helpful to talk to somebody and have somebody sort of help, because there's the COVID stress, and then there's the fact that COVID stress can be exacerbating a pre-existing condition or be resulting in just new pressures. I mean, I think we are seeing significant spikes in mental health and substance use issues emerging in adults as well through this. There's so much stress about finances and future and health and safety concerns. All of that would be something I would be asking that parent, if you are experiencing any of that, to consider reaching out for your own resource, your own support, contacting health center like CHC or other provider to see if you might benefit from talking to somebody and working through whatever additional anxiety you have.
A really good point about all the different information out there. What is your recommendation for sort of rules on remote learning days? Like, should parents be strict, or should they loosen the rules and allow their kids to be in their pajamas? And is it okay for their classroom to be their bedroom, or should they have a separate space in their, somewhere else in their house to be their classroom? Do you let them get away without making their bed that day? What's your recommendations for those days, since they're, different from actual in-person school days?
Sure. I am encouraging people to be a little bit fluid, and I'm encouraging families to take it one day at a time. So rather than I would say every situation is different. Teenagers tend to live in their rooms. They go sometimes I don't even know my son is home. He goes up to his room, closes the door, and I'm like, where is he? He's home. I had no idea. This is normal. But what we have done in our house is we have moved school out of the bedroom. And the reason we did that is because I want his bedroom to be his comfortable, sanctuary and more fun. And when school was there, it was just stressful for him. It was like he couldn't escape it. It was like, this is where I live, this is where I like to hang out, and this is where I have to do schoolwork. So some people find that works. Other teens, they need the quiet, they need the space. And so I think it's with teenagers, it should be a negotiation and a discussion. The kids at middle school and above, these kids are old enough to be part of these decisions. And so we should be, wherever possible, discussing. So do you want to, with my son, he recognized pretty early on that he needed some supervision. He didn't learn well trying to teach himself, and he was easily distracted. So by having school days, remote school days happen where I can keep an eye on him, even though I'm working and not involved, it made it easier for him than he finished work so much faster than when he was trying to do it all independently when he was last year. And so each kid may be different. So I don't think there's, again, that there's no one right answer, but I would encourage that fluidity, right? Before all of this, I would have limited my kids' screen time to 2 hours a day. Well, that's blown out of the water because they're on the screen all day long. That's the only way they could stay in touch with friends in the beginning. That's now how they get their education. And so we have to sort of relax some of the rules, and we have to be willing to sort of reevaluate every day. And so, don't underestimate the power of a mental health day. I've heard so many kids say, so are snow days gone? Are sick days gone? What with remote learning now, am I never going to get a break? And the reality is that some days your kids are just not going to be able to do it. And I think that that's okay. And so as a parent and as a psychologist, I would encourage you, obviously, not every day can be a mental health day, but if you generally are finding that your child is doing okay and keeping up with things, and then one day they just need more sleep or they need to sort of have a day off, have them reach out to their teachers and say, I'm having a hard time, or I need a break. And more often than not, the response from teachers has generally been pretty favorable, especially if your child is keeping up for the most part and they just need a break. So, I do know that certain schools also have restrictions and requirements. Like some schools are saying you have to use our device, you can't use your own device, or it's expected to dress for school. So I think the other thing is we need to help find that balance between what is being expected and what's reasonable expectations. And sometimes they're not the same. And so we want to kind of help our kids to make good choices, and we want to support the schools as much as possible. And kind of, if there are issues that parents have with schools, taking that out of from the kids, because we want to sort of be as encouraging of the schools as possible. Because I'm not a teacher, but I imagine that this is also not easy for them to try to navigate. And so the more that we are working together to get through this, and think that we've seen this sentiment expressed in a lot of places, is that we will get through this together. This is about everybody thinking about everybody else, and we need to worry about our own kids, but we are also thinking globally, and that is what's going to get us to the other side of this experience. And so that goes for it within our communities as well, trying to think about how to support the teachers and the experience that they're trying to give, and being a united kind of front to try to make it happen and happen well for our families and our kids.
That's such great advice. Thank you so much. I want to be tolerant of everybody's time tonight, and we are coming close to the hour. So what I'd like to do before turning it back over to Amy is I'd like to ask you, Dr. Welch, if you have any final remarks that you would like to make tonight.
Sure, just one. I think I've said a lot, but one thing is that this is the word we often hear these days is unprecedented. We are in unprecedented times, and we knew a lot in the field about trauma before, but we've never been through a trauma like this that is collective and continuous and uncertain. And so there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of things that are still yet to come. And we've learned quickly that this is not going to be a sprint, it's going to be a marathon. So the most important thing that I can emphasize is that we need to sort of be paying attention and taking care of ourselves and focusing as much as possible on the silver linings that this experience has presented. As a parent of an adolescent, I can tell you, and I have an elementary school student as well, but what got me through this experience and keeps me going is the fact that I look for the things that I wouldn't have had it if this hadn't have happened. I think about how scheduled and overscheduled our kids were, and how much family time and how much I got to eat dinner with my kids and bake with my kids and teach them how to cook and do some things that maybe we never would have had time for. And so for me, those are my silver linings. So the way that we're going to get through this and get through this intact and healthy is to try to keep in mind, as hard and as challenging and as stressful as this is, we need to keep looking for those points of light in what can feel like darkness. And so
Okay.
I hope everybody's able to do that.
Silver linings. Excellent. Thank you. I would like to thank everyone so much for joining us tonight. I'd also like to thank Amy and everyone at the Darien Arts Center for having us. We hope to see you back here next Tuesday evening for our presentation that is geared towards parents and caregivers of elementary school age children. And please remember, CGC is always here for you and your children. Thank you so much, Amy. And I wish everyone a good evening.